What's up? What's up, Movement family, Movement Extended family, and everybody else out there? This is Montell Watson. I hope everybody is excited as I am today about our discussions. This is the first of our Untriggered series. And in our Untriggered series, what we're looking to accomplish, guys, is actually take some of those unconscious biases and that we all walk around with today, whether it's race, ethnicity, gender, etc., all of those different things, and bring them to light, right? And make them conscious so that we can then go from there and have open minds, open dialogue, and continue to push conversations forward. And have some conversations about a lot of those elephants that are in the room, right? I'm so excited. I'm so excited. And one of the main reasons I'm excited is Dr. Nicole Martin is with us today. And, you know, I heard Casey say, to know Dr. Martin is to love Dr. Martin. It is the absolute truth. Dr. Martin is the executive director, the National Association, Bible Association, and she leads the different pieces in that at the organization today. And man, she is a decorative writer, speaker, and I also heard a rumor that she is a phenomenal singer as well. So excited to have her on today. And our leader, Mr. Casey Crawford, our CEO, our board director of our schools, our bank, is so pumped to have him on today with us as well. And Casey, man, I'm gonna kick it over to you, brother. I'm excited, and I know you're as excited to have Nicole on. But talk to us a little bit about why this conversation is important to you as well.
Yeah, well, man, I'd echo your words, and I'm so thrilled that folks are listening to this. I can tell you that you will be impacted the way I've been impacted by Dr. Nicole Martin. She is truly a gift. She's a gift, and she is someone whose voice needs to be amplified and heard. She is a voice of hope. She is a voice of understanding, and man, she is a voice who has challenged and stretched me in profound ways. A lot of ways that my wife does when I'm working out. Like, it takes you a lot further than you thought you were going to go. It does it with a smile somehow, and you're feeling good there on the other side of it. And truly, over the last 4 years now that I've known Nicole, she has really stretched my understanding and perspectives around race. Really challenged some beliefs I think that I held that were just this. They were unconscious biases. They were unconscious assumptions that were brought to light, and done so in a way that I think has helped me grow. And it's what I hope that you're going to experience as well, that you're going to learn, that you're going to grow, that we're going to be a community that stays in a posture of growth and leadership. And the reason we're having this discussion today is because a few months ago, so many of us watched in horror as we watched George Floyd murdered. And many of us had to process that with our children. Yep. And it brought, I think, to the forefront of the American psyche and conscious the horrific divide and problems that still exist in our nation and that are yet unaddressed. For as much work has been done, there is still so much important work yet to do. And in times of crisis, it is imperative that leaders bring context and perspective. And there is no person that I know whose perspective I would want to share and whose perspective I look for in my life as we think about a lot of these issues, other than Nicole. And so, yeah, I'm thrilled to and honored. And Dr. Martin just here, we honor you. We are so thrilled to have you. And I am excited. I'm going to stop talking here because I am excited to share your great voice and perspective on so many of these topics with our movement family, and then with real estate agents and loan officers and the lending and banking community around the United States.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Montell, and thank you, Casey. I am delighted to be hanging out with you guys. It feels like yesterday we were just having casual conversations about these kinds of things, and here we are today by this strange coincidence, this kind of collision of events with a greater openness and receptivity to have these same conversations, not just in the close quarters of an office, but with a wider audience. And I am super grateful for all of the people that are joining us today. I am absolutely filled with hope. And I think there are a number of reasons for that hope. One of the reasons for my hope is that what I just said, we have more people willing to listen. And if you've tuned in today, my hope is that in listening, this moment here will drive you to a process of your own learning journey, to resources. And we'll name a couple of resources that you should consider after this. But I hope that conversations like these, this untriggered conversation, would trigger something in each individual life for their own personal journey, for their own understanding that they might affect change within their communities. And that gives me tremendous hope. I'm also excited and hopeful because I have little kids. And like Casey and Montell, when you come into conversations like these, you realize the generational consequence. That a lot of what we're talking about here is what has happened over generations, but our decisions today are not about us, they affect the next generation. So every time I enter conversations like these, I'm entering with my little girls in mind at 5 and 7. What kind of world do I want to create for them? What kind of homes do I want them to buy? What kind of attitudes do I want them to have about things like home ownership, like citizenship, like what it means to be an American at times like these? I want them to have an identity that's shaped by conversations like these. So that gives me a great deal of hope, but it also brings a great deal of consequence. Because if we hear these conversations and do nothing, Casey, I think we'd be really, we'd be lost. It's the whole saying, if you always do what you always did, then you always get what you always got. And I think right now we have a chance to not do what we've always done, but to really take off the blinders and to do something different. Yes. So that our kids will grow up in a different reality. So in order for us to kind of press forward into that beautiful hope, I do think it's helpful to look backward. Now, I know I've been in like 18 conversations like these like the past 2 weeks, and there's always a sense of why are we still talking about this? The slavery was 400 years ago. Why are we still talking about this? There is no government regulated segregation. Why are we still talking about this? Because the effects of what was done 400 years ago are still felt today. So, I mean, in terms of housing, we're talking about today's wealth gap, that the fact that Black families make about 60% of the average income as white families, but hold about 5% of the wealth. I mean, how does that happen? Well, you all know that a lot of wealth passed down from generation comes from land and from houses. So what in the world has caused Black communities to not have houses? Well, now we've got to go back to slavery. So here's my little personal story. Over the past month, I've been kind of pressing my grandmother, my mother's mother, to talk about our family. And this is very personal for me because early in COVID-19, we lost my grandmother on my father's side. And it was really, it was a very hard thing. I don't know if anyone's ever had to do a virtual funeral. It was very, very hard. But what I realized is that there was history and there were stories that she told me that I needed, that I need now. So that's kind of pushed me to push my other living grandmother, tell me everything. So here's what she told me. We remember, of course, that in 1619, give or take a few years, the first slave was sold in Jamestown. And this was the first slave brought over from Africa, sold in Jamestown. Since that time, America has kind of built up on the labor of the free labor of slaves. So the slave trade was not initially about the dehumanization of individuals. The slave trade initially was about land. It was about building the land and doing it in the cheapest, most cost-efficient way. And when you happen to not see the other as fully human, it makes it easy. So all of the 1600s, 1700s, all of the land, and we're not just talking just the South, we're talking about the US. And then we haven't scratched the surface of what happened to the American Indians living in the US as we arrived in the US, because they're pushed out to to reservations. But that's a whole different history lesson that I hope people will engage in. The point is, we have labor, slave labor, building the land that they do not own. So you fast forward, 1890s, then we have Emancipation Proclamation. We just celebrated last month, Juneteenth. June 19th was the date that the last slaves received word of their freedom in Texas. So they're told, you are free. And now we have a new set of laws. New sets of laws on vagrancy. If you are a Black male that has been freed from slavery but don't have a job, you're allowed to be taken by the police. And once you're taken by the police, once you are arrested, you're put to work in the field. Michelle Alexander has a beautiful book. It's called The New Jim Crow, and it talks about how the prison system became the replacement of slavery. So now Black men were targeted, waiting for that labor to be kind of brought back into the plantations. You also have another element after slavery called sharecropping. And sharecroppers were people who could live on the land where they worked, but instead of getting paid or having any back pay for all of the years that they had worked, they got a few pennies, but they had to pay for the shelters that they had on the plantation. Enter my family. So my family, on both my mother and my father's sides, were slaves in North Carolina and South Carolina. This is not that far ago. These are my great grandparents were sharecroppers. So they freed from slavery, they stay on the land, they're sharecroppers, they have to pay to live on this land that they work. And my grandmother said that one of our relatives, the man of the house died. And so the owners came and said, well, we're taking your land, we're not paying you anymore, and you got to get out of this house, we're taking your house. And I was told that my great-grandmother at that great-great-great-grandmother at that time went in the house, got a shotgun, held it out and said, you're not taking this land over my dead body. Now, I mean, but it's an anomaly. But the point is, there was a genuine sense that even though you live here, you don't own this. So now we've got laws put in place to keep Black people from owning the land that they worked on. You fast forward past sharecropping, we have the Great Migration, we have Black people moving to the north. My family moved from South Carolina to Pittsburgh, and now we've got the 1900s. Early 1900s is like, there's an economic boom. We see a rise in the Black middle class. We see Harlem come alive. This is like the W.E.B. Du Bois. This is the time when inventions are taken off. This is, all of these beautiful stories that we hear. And because of that, not everybody's happy. Now we've got the government stepping in to create laws to reinforce segregation. Now we've got Jim Crow. Now we've got, we're in the 30s and the 50s, and we've got government regulated segregation where? In housing. Enter the FHA. The Federal Housing Association literally creates a system called redlining. And this is in the 20s, 30s, and redlining was literally creating having a map and drawing out in red ink the areas that were called high risk because Black people lived there. And if an area was populated by Black people, it was considered high risk. So Black people could not get loans to own homes, and they couldn't move into neighborhoods that were outside of their own communities. So now we've got this generational issues. And these issues are so compounded. The best resource I have that's been helping me with this is The Color of Law by Richard Rothschine. Excellent book. But he talks about redlining, he talks about Jim Crow, he talks about separate but equal, and then he also talks about the GI Bill. Now, again, for my own family, both of my grandfathers served in World War II. Both of them came home and were forced to move into the projects because they could not get a loan for a home. They could not get any subsidies for the home. They were not afforded the same privileges as the GI Bill. So now we've traveled all the way from 1600s to the early 1900s. Now we've got multiple generations not being able to own homes. And we have laws that make it nearly impossible. So, people think, well, what does this have to do with today? Today, we do not have redlining. Today, we do not have government regulations that prevent people from living in certain places. But today, we do have implicit bias. And implicit bias is the unconscious stereotypes that really come to us by way of racism, which enters another term, systematic racism. And I've heard a lot of conversation. Is systematic racism really a thing? We've made systematic racism a political thing. It's not political. It is real. It is simply the fact that from the 1600s till now, from the start of America till now, we have created laws that have created habits, that have created systems that give some people privileges and discount those privileges from others. It is real. It's happening in America. And there is something I think we can do about it. So today we have situations where Black families are told to take off any inclination, anything, any hint in their homes. If they're trying to sell a home, they must remove any artifact that would signify that this home is owned by a Black family. Because all of this research has shown that when a white family walks into a home and sees pictures of Black people on the wall, they automatically think in their minds, this home, this neighborhood doesn't have value. Now, where does that come from? Redlining isn't a thing, but the implicit bias from redlining, from slavery, from sharecropping, from patrolling, all of that carries on to today. We have situations where loan officers, I remember you all telling me about this, where Black loan officers or people with ethnic sounding names may have two different business cards because they know if I show up in a space and they automatically know my ethnicity, they will discount me in the field. We have instances where Black families feel like if you want to really get a nice home, you must go to a white realtor because then they'll be able to kind of serve as the bridge and maybe they'll be able to argue for the right price and all of these things. Why is this happening? Because of the implicit bias.
Nicole, it's getting real uncomfortable out here on social. Like you say, I can feel the tension rising, people shrinking back. We're touching on some things. You're touching on some things. You're touching on some, and I want to. A lot of the rest of our time, I'd love to spend.
Please.
Kind of pulling out some of these unconscious.
Please.
Frankly, calling out some of these uncomfortable elephants in the room.
Yes.
That oftentimes we do not find safe spaces to talk through.
That's right.
And one of the reasons I'm so thankful to have Nicole on and what Nicole and I are going to do, and I'm going to do more listening than talking because if you've seen her resume, you know why. Well, choke on her degrees. But you know, we're going to try to have a little bit of a conversation and flesh out some of these conversations that a lot of folks listening right now are scared to have or don't know how to have. Don't have language to have. And I'm going to do that with you because you're a person in my life that has shown me a whole lot of grace. You've shown me
You're so kind.
And
the same with me.
We've had some hard conversations back and forth. Not I don't think they were hard for us because we trusted where one another were coming from, but we dealt with topics that have been hard for society at large to address in a helpful, meaningful way. And so before we go to, I'd love just to anchor a couple points that you made so we don't go fast, past them too far, because one of the very big elephants in the room for lenders, people in banking in America is that they go, why are we being called racist today? Like after George Floyd, we saw a lot of social unrest and a lot of leaders getting up and talking about a lot of the problems in America. And one thing that was brought up a lot of times is that the banking institution is systemically racist. The leaders of it are. There was kind of what I think a lot of folks in banking and real estate heard was that institution is filled with racists and filled with racist practices that are harmful and detrimental and evil and mean-spirited. And I think too many of us in this space and then quietly back and forth, folks who go, why are we, do you do that? I don't do that. No, and then we look around and not know anyone who is at a macro level and practicing these horrible things. But what we're also unaware of was that these practices were commonplace. Like the reason there is a discussion about them today is because, many of our contemporaries, grandparents, great-grandparents experienced the realities of economic violence perpetrated against them by banks and by our federal government through these horrific practices. And those stories were passed down. Those stories were passed down. I can remember, we talk about, the implicit biases of today. I remember I had grandparents who worked in DC and my uncle had a hardware store in DC. A lot of his customers were Black. Many of his employees and teammates were Black. I saw him interact I watched, my uncle's for no money after work and 100 degrees, lying under, fixing made the neighbors, AC units, plumbing units and things. And I watched him serve a Black community, I think very faithfully and very well, and have a lot of Black friends. But I remember when I was growing up, my two best friends on either side of my house were Black. Our house was in the middle. We had Black neighbors on either side. And my uncle came by and was like, ooh, have you thought about like your property values? And I didn't, I mean, I was young, I wasn't understanding all this, but I remember him being concerned for my mom and dad going, you have Black neighbors, the house might depreciate. You don't want Black people in your neighborhood. And I grew up with my two best friends, this time me being Black, but thinking because somebody older and smarter, you're a young kid and you're looking up, and whatever the previous generation kind of tells you sinks in at a weightier level, and going, oh man, if I have Black neighbors, that means my house is going to be worth less.
That's right.
I hadn't done any research about that. I didn't know any facts. I just knew that somebody older and in a position of authority in my life at a time when I was young told me that is how it works in life.
Yep.
And Montell, you've shared the story, over and over again so powerfully that you were, I think, in your 20s before you believed home ownership was for you, because at a very young time in life, you heard it said, you can't trust the bank, you should never own a home.
Yep.
And I think that's one thing I've been learning in and through this process is sometimes when I hear people speak and they talk about truths, they talk about perspectives, those are perspectives that have been passed down.
Yes.
And just because they may not be, I don't say they're not true today, but well, they might not be true. They would say, hey, banks redline, that's not true today, like at any kind of macro level. We're tested for it. Thankfully, we have good federal laws to protect it. But the effects of redlining are still very real today. And redlining was absolutely a very real, harmful, horrible practice for a long period of time. And a lot of folks today don't recognize the realities, the hard realities of the past that still affect and impact.
That's right.
Our future. And so where I've hoped is to get more educated with a deeper understanding of the impact of the past so that we can come to one another, come together in a place of understanding and go, hey, why is it that our Black community doesn't trust banks?
Yes.
Well, now I know and understand. And we have the privilege of owning a bank that was founded in 1919 during the Jim Crow era in the South.
Wow.
And it was founded by pastors and Black businessmen who were explicitly denied access to credit, not because of their credit worthiness, solely because of the color of their skin.
That's right.
They walked into banks and said, could we borrow money? And said, no, you're Black, leave. We don't. And in response to that, created a bank that has lasted for 100 years to do exactly what you articulated, issuing loans to farmers and to sharecroppers to be able to plant their crops, reap the benefits of those. But man, we have to carry that history and understand that history if we're going to think about how to, redeem this future. So I'd love to get into some of these. There are some little things that you mentioned there. We kind of talked about them a little bit quickly. That I think we should pull out. And I know you just moved. Moved, so you can speak. That's the crazy thing. You can go all kinds of levels. You can get really theoretical, or we can get very practical. Also, stories of comments that were made just while you were in the process of moving. And some of these things, again, I think maybe white America has these conversations over here by themselves. Black America has these conversations by themselves, and we rarely share those conversations. But man, there is power when we do.
That's right.
No, you got some stuff too, but I'd love to go through some of these elephants in the room and so, some of these unconscious. But you mentioned one. I need a white realtor.
Yep.
So as a Black woman with, a doctorate, a reverend, every degree from Princeton, everywhere else you could have, you were made to understand that in order to sell your house at highest value or buy the right house in the right neighborhood, you needed to get a white realtor.
Yeah. And again, part of this is part of the implicit bias, but also part of it is something that you mentioned earlier. It's trust. So when there are generations of laws that cause people not to trust the government or to trust the things that are in place to help us, then the mistrust becomes the divide. So there is a certain, why would a Black family feel the need to choose a white realtor? Because they want to choose someone that's going to be trusted at the decision table. Why, and the same goes, why would Black families choose Black realtors? Because they want someone that they can trust. Home ownership is never just about money. It's never just about signing papers. This is about your future. This is about your past. This is like home ownership it's the embodiment of your dreams and your hopes. So you want to make sure that you have trust and that you can advocate for yourself. You want someone who can advocate for you. And for some Black families, they do feel like if I want the right home in the right neighborhood, I'm going to have a white realtor. And let's back up. When we were in Charlotte and I served on the Housing Advisory Board, I was shocked to know that there were still today in 2020 homes that had deeds where it was written on the deed not to be sold to Black families. So, I mean, there's so much at work. And the question for me is, why haven't we changed that? Why is there still a sense that this is the way it is? And I remember even early, when my husband and I first got married, we were looking at houses. There were some things in the housing industry that we were just taught to say, well, listen, this is what it is. If you want to go into this neighborhood, it's going to be what it's going to be. If you want to get into the school district,
it's going to be what it's going to be. What is it going to be?
That's right. Well, it's going to be, if you're looking for good schools, good meaning funded schools, if you're looking for safe neighborhoods in some cases, then you're probably looking at a certain wealth category. And here we go back to the wealth issues and the wealth disparities. And you're probably looking at a white neighborhood. And then as a Black family, you've got to consider all the things. How will my kids be treated at that school? How will I be viewed when I walk around the neighborhood? I'm still on the neighborhood app on our old neighborhood. It is never uncommon, at least a couple times a week, for someone to type, there was a Black man walking down the street, or there was a Black man who looks suspicious. This is today in 2020. So you've got to think about what kind of lifestyle do I want to create? What battles am I willing to fight? And who am I doing it for? And most of the time we're doing it for our kids. And here's the interesting thing. As I was reading through The Color of Law, in the time of redlining, the assumption was that Black families wouldn't be able to afford living in the communities where white families lived, but truly Black families paid more to live in those communities. So, I mean, this is not just about money. It is so complex. But again, here's my hope. I really do believe that there are pieces of this that we can change, that you can change. And when I think about, the real estate and our home buying experience, and even that of my parents, I mean, my parents were told when they first got a realtor, well, now I don't know if you want to look at that neighborhood because it's all white. And, they're known for making sure that the community stays all white. What in the world? How do people make sure that a community stays all white? And what presumed benefits do they believe they're getting? And what presumed loss do they receive when a Black family or a family of color moves in? Steep.
Yep, it is. I mean, I really do think some of that is passed down even to those of us who, hey, I grew up with the gift of a really diverse friend group, or really
diverse, you did.
And that's been a gift in my life. Yet there are these little things way back in my brain, that somebody had told me at a very young age that I kind of took as that. Hey, if a Black family moves in next to you, might depress your home values. That's right. Again, hadn't processed that fully and faithfully, but I do think that there are many of those unconscious biases that rest and lurk in the back of so many minds still today, that where they would never say, they'd never put on their deed, can't sell to a Black family. Yes. You might be nervous if we'll move in next door.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It's going to be a problem for my home value.
That's right.
And that's hard to even say.
Hard
to even say.
Yeah.
But I think if we're honest, we all have known at least of circumstances.
Absolutely.
That truth. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I think one of the tough things is, you hear these big problems and you go, there was a real outcry on social media. After George Floyd's murder, of white people do something. Mm-hmm. Do something.
Yep.
And I can tell you that as a white person who cares and who wants to be engaged in the conversation and be a part of the solution and that was a hard one to hear. I think I understood the sentiment behind it, is saying, help, use your influence, use your privilege, use these attributes you have to redeem this situation, to make it better in any way that you can.
Yeah.
But I think many white people looked at one another, or quietly, we look at each other and go, do what?
Mm-hmm.
What can we do? Like, what is there to do? And I'd love you, like, talking through some of those things, and saying, hey,
what can you do?
because these are soft, right? These are kind of mushy. This isn't, I think there were some big obvious laws that we had to change as a nation.
Yes.
And thankfully, amazing leaders like Dr. King, who was murdered, and 7 days later, a Fair Housing Act was passed, did some incredible, important work to change these big things that we can go, hey, that's a law. It's wrong.
Yes.
We're going to change it. And we got the time.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's still generations of work that are these softer practices.
Yes.
That are harder to identify, I think, but important today to identify what we can do and redeem. I'd love to hear and tell too, man, kind of some of your thoughts. You're obviously a lender. You're on the inside of things that our industry as lenders and as real estate agents can do to create a more redeemed future.
Yep.
Yeah. So, man, so many parts of this conversation, Nicole gave so many different examples that I've dealt with myself. Right? So many different examples, as from being a Black individual in the workplace, touching on that, and having the two different cars. Where for me, my first name is William, right? And everybody knows me as Montell, but in my first job, I always went by William because I was on the telephone. And I just internally, just like, it was just so normal. Like, that's exactly what I should do. I should go by William, because I know that if I go by William, I am going to have an opportunity to have more calls go in a positive manner, right? And the experience of the home search, and just having a lot of that internal long-term feelings of, is this, can I own a home? Like, I've never seen it. My dad still to this day, in case you touched on this, my dad still to this day, from a trust perspective that Nicole talked about, he carries cash. He carries cash in his pocket because of that trust aspect. So as a lender, and some of the things that, what we can do is, gosh, like, take your time as a loan officer and as a lender, banker, whatever it is, to understand that other person that's sitting across from you, the other person that's on the phone with you, that may not look like you, that may be a little bit different than you, and have a beautiful conversation to help them. And if they're not ready right now, guess what? Let's help them get on a plan to get them ready for the future.
Yes, that's right.
Casey. Just a second. So Montell's one of the most liked people, and we have 4,000 people in our organization. We call him the homecoming king, because everyone's
so great.
About a day doesn't go by that somebody calls, there's just somebody that I really connected with.
I believe it. I believe it.
I liked him so much I had to move in next door.
That's great.
I mean, truly, this is one of the most, and I want our movement family to hear this, though, because, man, until you shared that story with me the other day, and I thought about a lot. You didn't feel comfortable using your name, like your name. Then the name has power, right? A name has weight, and because your name gave an indication to the color of your skin, like how God made you. Like, God made you, and everyone loves you. Everyone that knows you, but because of society, because of maybe things in your mind, because of a fear of perception, because of the reality that names that would be traditionally associated with a Black man do not receive as much professional engagement as William, Bill, more traditionally white name. It just, I mean, the psyche of that, where you're feeling like you have to use a different name so that no one knows the color of your skin. I just think, as a white man, as many of our teammates at Movement, the realtors that know you, loan officers know you across the nation, have never really processed that and deeply kind of thought about, what does that do, man? And
Mhm.
and again, that's where it gets tough, because I know you don't look at anyone and say, "Hey, man, say you're sorry for me. Say you're sorry because I feel this way." You don't ever put anyone in that position. At the same time, man, it doesn't. I don't think we don't stop enough.
Yep.
Put ourselves in your shoes.
Mm-hmm.
Oh man, how must it feel
Mm-hmm.
to be this incredibly confident individual that everyone loves, everyone wants, create the image of God, you made black, born black, like proud of that, and yet have to like literally feel the need to professionally hide that using a different name, like go undercover.
Yep.
I think that's something that most of us haven't ever remotely experienced or processed.
Yeah, man. And it's so out of all these conversations and everything that's come about, like since, George Floyd's murder, a lot of emotion, a lot of,
Yes.
a lot of emotion and things inside of me that I didn't even know was there.
Yep.
Right. From a lot of those in my past of dealing with different racial issues that, quite frankly, Case, I just kept sweep it under the rug.
That's right.
And I'm from Southwest Virginia in the sticks.
Yeah.
And I could give you story after story after story, and I forgot about those stories.
Yes.
But it all came up,
that's right.
recently because of this, and it took me to an emotional place.
Yes.
And man, it comes all in one time with a lot of emotions, and it was a lot of reflecting that I had to do personally for myself.
Yep.
And no, I to your point, like I never look and say, "Gosh, why didn't anybody like come and just why didn't anybody tell me sorry for the way that they?" Like, I don't take that viewpoint because I'm very hopeful that we're having these conversations right now more than ever.
Yeah.
And a group like this, we're able to do this live right now today through social, et cetera. And through this, we hope that we continue to have change, and everything that Dr. Martin Luther King has done and all the other forefathers that have stepped up in the past, what they have done, the groundwork that they've laid, we are at a place now where we can continue to push it forward.
Yep.
Right. In a positive way. Dr. Martin, I actually have a question. Two-part question for you is that, for someone of color that are dealing with all of these emotions, they come at this time. How do we deal with that pain?
Yes,
right?
That's great.
How do we deal with that pain and deal with the pain to move forward?
Can I ask Nicole to put this little part in, and also, deal with the pain, because what's been such a gift being Tell's friend and working out like every day as we have these conversations. Deal with the pain, and for yourself also, but also so that we can help inform. I'll say many white Americans or Americans who don't understand all the pain and need to, right? Because it's really hard for us to move forward together when we're talking past each other, and folks are like, why are we rioting in the streets? Why are burning buildings? Why are bricks being thrown around? It's not a matter of condoning activities, but it was understanding them.
Yeah.
Like, why are these? If you help us, with
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm really grateful, Montell, that you talked a little bit about the emotions you've experienced. This is common. And this is not just for Black people. All of us have experienced a wide range of emotion. And those who see depictions of themselves and their likeness on the screen will feel it most. So at American Bible Society, we call this generational trauma. Generational trauma is often the trauma that's been passed down from each generation. And here's the interesting thing. Black people aren't the only ones in America that have been traumatized by racism. White people have been traumatized by racism, and Casey shared a little bit about that. We haven't even scratched the surface of the trauma affecting Latino Americans, that when a Latino family moves in next to a white family, the assumption is there's going to be a bunch of cars on the lawn, the property value is going to go down, there's going to be, all kinds of things, assumptions. And so now we have another category of people falling into this space. But here's what I think we can do. And I do think the action steps are slightly different depending on how you approach the conversation, but they're kind of the same. And I would lump it into three main categories. I would think the three main categories are healing, truth, and trust. And I do think there's some order to that. So the healing part, when we talk about Black families, when we talk about specifically Black families and Black men who are constantly like, George Floyd was just another thing for the average Black man in America, who always has to be aware of being pulled over, who's always aware that when he walks down the street, somebody might switch their purse to the other side, who's always thinking, or who's always seen as either a stellar athlete or a criminal and very little in between, or professional Black men who have to constantly defend themselves and articulate themselves in a way that they're constantly proving to the world, I'm not what you think I am. So when George Floyd died, there's a generational trauma happening for Black men that goes back to the beginning of our conversation, to Black men who were targeted after slavery and thrown into the prison systems, to Black men who are unfairly targeted in certain cases. So this healing is real. And again, we call this generational trauma because we think that there are steps that you can take as a Black person in America to bring healing. And that healing initially should be just for you. It shouldn't be healing so that you can do something or healing so that you can talk. It should be healing because you need that healing, because your parents needed that healing, because your ancestors needed that healing. And here's the hardest part about trauma in Black communities. We've normalized trauma so much that we don't even think about it when it happens. So some of the things that you talked about, Casey, it happens a lot when I talk to my white friends about, code switching. That's using one language with one group of people and using another language with another group of people. It's speaking Ebonics with some of my girlfriends and then turning into a more professional sound when I'm at the workplace. One of my white friends was like, "That's awful. That's exhausting. How do you do that?" It's like, we just do. So we've normalized the trauma. And when something happens in the news, it opens the wound again. And the things that we had just passed over and just kind of got over because we needed to, we start to realize, you know what? That is exhausting. That was painful. All those crazy things that people said to me, somebody said to me the other day, I think that Black history is fake news. That provokes trauma. It brings back, and the thing is, it's not just that comment. It brings you back to being in the third grade and somebody asking to touch your hair. It brings you back to somebody saying, well, why is your hand two different colors? I'd never heard that in my life. She's like, it's light on the inside and dark on the outside. What? I literally looked at my hand like, oh, it is.
I just checked mine. I was like,
It's like, so that's the healing part. I think people of color need to take advantage of their own healing. Now, for Christians, that healing is found in Jesus Christ. I find my healing in community with Christ. There are so many health professionals that are now opening the doors to walk you through the trauma that you've experienced, not just yourself, but generational. So that's the healing. The second part of this, I think, is truth. And this is the advantage we have today. Thank the Lord for the internet and for great books. You need to understand the truth for yourself. And this is for all people. All people, now is the time to uncover the narrative. Some of the things we've talked about, this is the time. And I think this is what those of you listening can do. Learn the truth. Learn another narrative. For every point of history, there's always another narrative. If all of your entry points come from the same news station, get another narrative. If all of your friends are of the same ethnicity, get another narrative. If all of the people pouring into your life that you think are mentors are all the same and kind of look like you, it is time for you to get another narrative because you cannot know the truth from one angle. So we've got to get healing, we've got to get some truth, and then we've got to build trust. And this is where I think the relationships come in. This is the time for us to individually build diverse friendships. This is the time for us to individually walk the journey of trust. And I've got to say, for my white friends and for those of you who are listening, this will be hard. It is hard to build trust when trust has been broken for generations. It is hard to sit and listen when you feel like you have so much to say. My friend Latasha Morrison has a process. It's called Be the Bridge. They have learning groups and communities. They go through history. And for the first 3 months of the process, the white participants are asked to listen. And some people feel like, oh my gosh, that's so unfair. But those who have gone through the program said, I just didn't realize how much I'd been talking and I wasn't even talking. I just didn't realize my story was being told over and over, that my Black colleagues had heard my story over and over, and I'd never stopped to hear theirs. So there is a trust that needs to be built. And this is where I think loan officers and realtors and those in the housing industry can step in, because trust is built with time. It's built at the dinner table. It's built saying, let me not just sell you a home, let me get to know your story. It's built on getting to know people for who they are beyond the color of their skin. And what people of color need most from loan officers, it's the trust that's going to be built by relationships that take time. And how do those take time? By engaging in the community, by getting to know the pastors in the communities that you want to serve. And that's what movement does. You guys have done this even through Movement Day. It's getting engaged in the things that people in the community care about. And over time, you build trust. So those are the things that I mean, there's so much more to be said, but I really deeply believe in this healing. This healing has to come first, because I can't build trust with someone when I myself don't know where I'm broken.
There's a lot to unpack there.
Yes.
Yeah. So I do not envy you wrapping this up, but we do have a couple more minutes before we do. Man, Nicole, that was powerful and feels very right also. Yeah. And I also want to highlight, I think I heard you say 3 months of listening.
Yeah.
3 months of listening.
That's
the white story and white narrative has been told is deeply understood, particularly if you're white in America. You've heard it a lot, you've heard it. And it's 3 months of listening. Yeah. And then we can contextualize that, right, to relationships and things. But I do think as real estate professionals, as bankers, as lenders, you might not need to spend a disproportionate amount of time getting to know every one of your clients. You might have a whole lot that look like you, that talk like you, that have similar backgrounds. And frankly, for this time and place in American history, if you want to have a great relationship, you do that, build relationships. But I think what I heard, and one of my hopes is like this, the next season step, I think, in America is going to be very much one about building relationship and building trust. And it happens over time, and it happens incrementally. And there's not a law to change to say, hey, we all need to be friends. But there's an intentionality to that every person is going to be really responsible for in their own life and their own process. And I can tell you, if you are a white lender or white realtor out there in America today, take some time. I mean, listen, heed these words. Take some time and get to know some of the folks you're coming in contact with that don't look like you. Whether they're Latino, Black, whatever that might look like. Take some time and get to know these families, these stories, these backstories. I know. I'll tell you, a white elephant, as Ryan and I talked about, is that if you leave a voicemail and you sound Black, less likely the loan officer is going to call you back. Wow. There's an assumption that there's a credit challenge. We've looked at it statistically, not inside a movement, just in an aggregate in our industry. That is a reality for Black borrowers. Imagine that feeling when you feel like the person who's supposed to lend you money, the institution that holds the money, which represents a lot of power and influence and everything else, won't even call you back if you sound. There's some hurt there. I think that Nicole pointed out that we in the industry need to own. Yes. And if you want to be about more than words, if you want to be about more than putting a little prayer hands or emojis on social or putting a social graph, I mean that stuff's all good and fine, but please let your words translate into action. Yes. And they might not be action that gets 10,000 likes on Facebook. These are going to be little actions that are intentional and regular over time as you interact with diverse borrowers and potential homeowners. And I think to me, much of our story forward is going to be based in these relationships and the intentionality that we all show to form them, to hear, to grow together and to really intentionally work for a better tomorrow.
Absolutely.
Because we've documented this well. The gap in Black and white home ownership is larger today than it's ever been.
I know.
ever.
That's true.
Ever. So we passed all these important laws, but actually before we passed the laws, there was less of a gap in white and black home ownership. Today, we have a bigger gap in black and white home ownership, and yet, as Montell pointed out, you know, when he came to the realization that he should own a home, he was already qualified.
Yeah.
He'd been qualified for a number of years. He could have attained that dream much earlier in the process. We have a huge contingent of black millennials that can and should own homes. They can and should own homes. That's not really just because we know that is a pathway to economic success in America, just that aggregate. That's not right for every single family. If you're hearing me right now, it doesn't mean every family needs to own a home, but in aggregate,
yes,
a pathway to financial success in America is through home ownership.
Yes.
And there's a massive contingent of black millennials that are credit qualified to own a home.
Yep.
But for many reasons, aren't doing so. And I think our contribution as lenders, as realtors, is to reach across, understand, listen to maybe why the family's choosing not to do so, and then offer, you know, after we've heard, your perspective as a professional in this industry as to how this may be a benefit to this individual or family.
Yep.
In home ownership. That's
great.
Yours, brother.
Yeah. So, wow, this has been fantastic for everybody out there listening. I hope and pray, and I know that you got something out of this today. And Dr. Martin, thank you so much for grounding us in the history.
Yeah.
And talking about a lot of those unconscious biases that we all walk around with today. Talking about the trust, talking about the healing. And how I'd like to end today is to, you know, on two different pieces, like end us with the word of hope, as well as what is like one or two action items that, you know, what we can do to as to Casey's point is take these words and walk it out.
Yeah.
Right? How do we take the words and then walk it out with action?
Yeah.
So leave them with hope and action.
Well, again, I think the first step is listening today. I mean, for many people, this can be overwhelming. The history is overwhelming. Your own emotional process may be overwhelming. You may be feeling guilt or anger or just despair, and you may feel so overwhelmed that it would cause you to not act. I would say press through that emotion to do, as Anna says on Frozen 2, the next best thing. Just do the next best thing. For some people, the next best thing is pick up a book. And we've given a couple of options. For some people, the next best thing is listen to a podcast. That might be the next best thing. But for other people, the next best thing right now might be to pause and reflect. It might be to pick up the phone and call a friend. It might be to take a tangible action within your professional field to right a wrong. But whatever it is, don't get weary in doing this good thing. Do the next right thing, what is right in front of you, and persevere. Because this is not just about a moment. We're not here just because of a one person's death. We are here to change things for the next generation. And that's going to take time. And that may not even happen in our lifetimes. But for me, I want to be seen gradually and progressively doing the next best things, one step at a time, so that we can change things for our kids.
I'm gonna just tell them that because I think something Nicole just said right there is, it's so critical, and I want you to hear, particularly movement family. A movement in this next season in America is not a moment.
Yes.
It's not a moment, but moments do catalyze movements.
Yes.
And we've had a number of them in our country. And my challenge to our movement teammates, to our industry, would let this moment in American history catalyze a movement.
Yeah.
You know, and let that movement be marked by acts of love, acts of understanding, acts of unity, acts of courage, because it is hard and scary to have these conversations sometimes. I love Nicole. I know she loves me. I love Tell. I know he loves me. And I still am nervous as a white man to enter into some of these conversations because I might say something wrong. I probably did a few times. And enter in. Take the step. Take the step. I heard Dr. Nita Phillips say on Instagram, I loved it. She said she was kind of paraphrasing Frozen, but she said, hey, do the next right thing. Take a step. Take a step. Take a step. And I love it. Listen, let this moment catalyze the movement. And the movement is marked by taking steps.
Amen.
Taking steps. You know, taking steps in faith, taking steps towards people, and taking those steps in love and understanding. and asking for grace in the process, because you're gonna mess it up.
Yes.
I mess it up. Montell, every now and then, I bet if we talk to Nicole's husband, he would let us know that even
Oh, he would say she messes it
Reverend
up.
Dr. Nicole Martin every now and then has messed it up. We know we're going to mess it up, and we're going to mess it up together. And I think people know the intentions of your heart. You walk that out over time, and so let them do those good works that are in accordance with the intentionality you have here to love and value, serve one another, and do it with grace and love. Nicole, you are a gift. Thank you for being a friend in my life, for being a voice in my life, for being so gracious to come on here with us. She's not in the lending industry, believe it or not. She's a lot of background in that as a minister, has written a great book, Made to Lead. I love how you model even leadership as a woman. 65% of our top salespeople in movement are women, and we love that. Yeah,
That's great.
Give a woohoo. And we, again, that's another gift I've had in my life, and I think it's a gift for so many folks that they when they open themselves up to receive. So.
Thank you for having me.
With you, and we appreciate all of you that have invested this hour with us. We know it was an investment. There's a lot of things you could have been doing during this time, and you invested some time. Now let that investment pay a return and a dividend with some action, some profitable. Think, listen, process this, and then do the next best thing.